Sometimes when you read a super short book, it feels like a waste of time, but sometimes you read a super short book, and like this stack here, it absolutely blows you away. I have 8 super short books that are all under 150 pages, some of them only around 100, that I still think about years after reading them, and some of them are 5 stars, and some of them just genuinely changed my life. Tamsh by Sven Holm is a dystopian novel set in the future where the world has experienced a nuclear apocalypse and the world is in complete disaster. But luckily for the rich people, there is a luxury coastal resort called Termush, where years in advance of the world disaster, rich people paid a lot of money to reserve a room to escape and survive. The luxury resort has ambient music and luxurious food and radiation shelters, and everyone feels very happy and content there. But soon things begin to crumble. Every so often, a survivor who is walking the land outside of the resort turns up at the door begging for help, and they let them in because, people have a heart and they want to help others. This book really looks into what our morals would look like at the end of the world, because as more and more of these external survivors keep turning up, people who are now living there without paying, everyone at this resort starts to question, do we continue helping these people because it is the right thing to do, or does it defeat the whole purpose of us paying so much money to be here when all of these people are now living here for free? This book is only 119 pages, and I would have actually loved this to be a full-length novel because I think so much more could have been explored, but it was still an absolute banger. I loved this. It is left quite ambiguously, and I always enjoy those types of endings. I know not everyone does. This is actually a republication. It was originally written and published in 1967, and that is kind of terrifying how ahead of its time this book was. And I think that is what is so scary about this story, is that when we do at some point in the future reach world disaster, this is very much what our world could look like. This is something that will 100% happen. The capitalistic, selfish society that we live in, a luxury coastal resort for the wealthy to escape world disaster, is really not that crazy of an idea, and is something that will probably happen. And that makes this book even more haunting, to be honest. Over time in this story, the management of the resort starts censoring the news. Anybody who is causing a ruckus is sedated so they don't influence the other residents. And over time, they also begin to realise that the resources they need to keep this resort afloat, the luxurious meals and the drinks and the luxurious amenities, are potentially not actually going to last. So this story also begs the question that although money can provide safety, how far will it actually stretch? My Death by Lisa Tuttle is one of my favourite books of all time. I've read it twice now and still absolutely loved it. This follows a widowed writer who has not written anything for quite some time, and she is meeting up with her agent to discuss what her next book will be. She goes to Edinburgh to meet up with him to discuss what's going to happen, and she decides that she's actually going to write a biography, and she wants to write a biography of Helen Ralston, who is the muse of a famous painter, and she is often quite forgotten about. Though Helen Ralston was a muse for a famous artist, she was also a writer and an artist in her own right as well. Helen Ralston's writing was no longer in print, and her most famous painting, My Death, was deemed as too unsettling and malevolent to be seen in public. Over the coming weeks, our narrator is investigating Helen Ralston and actually finds a way to interview her and meet her to write this biography. But as she spends more time with her and learns more about Helen Ralston's life, she realises that there are some uncanny similarities between herself and Helen Ralston. This book is only just over 100 pages, and I still think about this every week, to be honest. I think about it all the time. Uncanny is the perfect word to describe this book. It is quite a calm and quiet novel, but also teeters on the edge of being quite unsettling and emotionally uncomfortable. And as time goes on throughout these 100 pages, everything becomes a little bit peculiar. The piece of art chosen for the cover of this book perfectly encapsulates the unsettling feeling of the story. But also, a fun fact is, I researched who this painting was by and what it was called because I loved it so much. And I discovered that the artist behind this book cover, behind the original painting, is a woman that was known as Cameron. And she was an artist, but she was also a cult leader, and she has such an interesting history. And I just think having an artist with that background and choosing her painting for the cover of this book, it just really adds a little something. If you're a fan of authors like Yoko Agawa or Lena Wolf, you will probably really like this, because all of these three authors' books, I feel like they don't have a super action-packed plot, but they have that quiet peculiarity to them. You all probably already know this book, but this is Chess by Stefan Zweig. And as someone who does not know how to play chess in the slightest, has never actually finished a game of chess, I still absolutely loved this book. It was so entertaining, and not knowing how to play chess did not alter my enjoyment of the book at all. If you don't know, this is set on a cruise ship that is bound for Buenos Aires in the year 1941, and aboard this ship is the world chess champion that absolutely no one can beat. But a group of passengers think that they've got a chance and they decide to challenge him, and he accepts. And the first man that starts a match with this world champion is at first completely failing. He's 100% going to lose. But then a man from the crowd, he hears a voice from the crowd who is quietly whispering suggestions for moves he can make and is predicting what move the champion is going to make next. And then the game begins to totally do a 180. This story is literally only 80 pages, but it is so tense the entire way through, and it explores how deep and dark humans' obsessions can be. Stefan Zweig is obviously an incredibly well-loved writer, and for years this book really didn't appeal to me. Like, the cover doesn't stand out to me, the name of the book doesn't stand out to me. However, I am so glad that something made me pick this up, something made me read it, because I think this is an absolute masterpiece and I think everyone should be reading this. There is sometimes this negativity on bookish spaces that short books are pointless and people that read short books aren't real readers. I think Stefan Zweig absolutely proves this narrative wrong. Small Boat by Vincent Delecroix, the translation was only actually really recently published on the 23rd of April this year. And this book is something I'm going to be thinking about for the rest of my life. And quite honestly, I think this book should be required reading. In November 2021, a group of 29 migrants were travelling on an inflatable dinghy from France to the UK, and the boat started to capsize. They were ringing the French Rescue Centre, begging for help, begging for someone to save their lives. But unfortunately, that night, 27 of 29 of the migrants died. The French Rescue Centre kept giving the group of migrants hope, telling them that help was on the way, but in fact, it wasn't. That was a real event, and this is a fictionalised account of it. For the majority of this book, it is narrated by a woman working at the French Rescue Centre, whose role it was to take calls from people who were asking for help. And on this day, the group of people on this dinghy called into the French Rescue Centre saying their boat was going to capsize. They desperately needed help, else they were going to die. The woman, our narrator, who was answering these calls, were telling the group of migrants that help was on the way and it would be there soon. They kept ringing her back saying, "Why has no one come yet? We're going to die." And she kept telling them that help was on the way. But in fact, it wasn't. She was lying. And by the time anyone did come to rescue them, only 2 of them had survived. The majority of the story is our narrator being interrogated by the police, asking what happened on this night, why she responded to the migrants in the way that she did. And this woman is taking absolutely no accountability for her actions. She believes it was the fault of these people for choosing to travel to the UK. She does not believe she is complicit in their deaths and that she was just fulfilling her job role. In the middle of this book, to break up this story with the narrator, we actually get a glimpse of the point of view of the migrants who were on this boat. It is only short, but it is harrowing. It's absolutely haunting and heartbreaking, one of the most devastating things I've ever read. They were literally clinging on for every last breath. I don't know how anyone can read this and not be absolutely heartbroken. I'm going to quickly read to you the first short paragraph of this book because it perfectly depicts how devastating the entire thing is. So this is from the perspective of the woman working at the rescue centre. The first sentence is, "I didn't ask you to leave," I said. "It was your idea, and if you didn't want to get your feet wet, love, you shouldn't have embarked. I didn't push you into the water. I didn't fetch you from your village or field or ruin of a suburb and put you in your wretched, leaky boat. And had the waters up to your ankles. I get it that you're frightened and you want me to save you and you're impatient. You're counting on me. But I didn't ask you for any of that, so you'll have to just grin and bear it and let me get on with my job." I feel like that paragraph perfectly encapsulates a lot of society's view towards migrants, and I think everyone needs to be reading this book. Everyone needs their eyes to be opened. And although this is a fictional account of a real event, things like this are happening all the time, but no one is paying attention. Caroline Blackwood in general is an author I always recommend, but this is The Stepdaughter, which I believe is actually her debut novel. This is about Jay, who is living in a fancy Upper West Side apartment, and her husband has fled to Paris with his new lover, leaving her behind with their own 4-year-old daughter, but also leaving her behind with his daughter Renata, Jay's stepdaughter. Jay finds her stepdaughter unbearable. She's miserable, she's grumpy, the only thing she eats is cake, and Jay just finds her very weird and does not like her at all. Jay finds herself being quite cruel and wicked to her stepdaughter. The book consists of Jay writing letters to imaginary people expressing her feelings around her stepdaughter, her feelings of loneliness, her absolute despair in being left in this apartment by her husband. At times this book is actually quite dark and unsettling, but as Caroline Blackwood always does with her books, it is also incredibly extremely witty and funny and humorous. Jay sees her stepdaughter as this helpless little creature who is intimidated by her and stays out of her way to appease her. But actually, Jay comes to find out that Renata, her stepdaughter, is not exactly who she thinks that she is. She realizes she actually knows nothing about her and her own internal struggles and her own life and character and personality. And the clash between them is at times hilarious. If you're into books that don't necessarily have much of a plot but just have quite weird characters, you'll really like this. Caroline Blackwood and Barbara Comans, for me, are two authors that I lump together because to me their writing is so similar, their humour is so similar, and I love both of them so much. The Witnesses Are Gone by Joel Lane is for fans of cursed media or lost media. This is a little bit different from the other books I've recommended so far. This is quite creepy and eerie. It's about a man who moves into a new home and the previous residents have left a bunch of crap behind, and he's rooting through it and comes across a bunch of old video cassettes. Curious as to what they are, so he puts them on, and one of them is a bootleg copy of quite a morbid and disturbing film by a French director. Our protagonist Martin is incredibly curious about this film and about this director and starts becoming obsessed with him. He's researching him, trying to find other people who've seen his films. But he's starting to wonder whether this director actually ever existed. As Martin's world becomes swallowed by this obsession and need to know more about this French director, he is ruining his relationship with his partner and his friends and his general day-to-day life. I think this book is written so brilliantly because Joel Lane never shows us these dark and horrible, disturbing things. He doesn't give us the gross details, but somehow still manages to make the story so unsettling. Rather than giving us these graphic details of what this mysterious video cassette entails, he uses our fear of the unknown to creep us out instead. Also, what I think is fascinating about this book is the time it was written and how it would change if it would happen today. It was written in the early 2000s when fandom culture and our addiction to the internet was much, much less. Back then, trying to find out information about this director would have actually been really difficult and would have sent Martin on a wild goose chase. Whereas nowadays, no matter how niche or unknown someone or something is, there will be a plethora of information and people talking about it on the internet, no matter how small it is. If this mysterious director with his disturbing films was happening in the year of 2025, there would be rabbit holes upon rabbit holes of threads and forums and content all about it. Everyone would be digging for more information. Whereas for Martin in the early 2000s, upon discovering this disturbing video, he didn't have these options. He didn't have access to this information. So whilst trying to maintain his mundane daily life, having to balance that with wanting to dig deeper into these disturbing events, dig deeper into this obsession of his, and it is taking over him. A Devil Comes to Town has one of the most unique concepts of a book I've ever read. This is set in a small but charming village within the Swiss mountains, and all of the residents of this village are writers. The one thing on everyone's mind is literature. So one day, when the devil turns up in a luxurious black car, claiming to be a hotshot publisher, the entire village spirals. Devil publisher says he is looking for an author to win a new literary prize, and now all the residents are against each other. They're in competition with each other, and they become completely swept up in it. All of the residents are now at the mercy of the devil because the only thing they're focusing on is their own manuscript. They're all desperate to win this literary prize, and everyone is against each other. No one cares about each other. It is about how our thirst for recognition, validation, and success can completely shatter our bonds with our community, our family, our partners, our friends. The story is full of melodrama and in one aspect is quite tongue-in-cheek, but on the other side it is actually quite horrifying. It is horrifying to see how easily this entire community is just descending into chaos. What was once a village of a tight-knit community is now reeking of narcissism. Whilst there is this rivalry happening between all the residents, the village is also simultaneously becoming overrun by rabid foxes. The environment and nature and wildlife has a huge part to play in this story. It is almost a character within itself, and I absolutely love books that do that. Living Things follows four graduates who are travelling from Madrid to the south of France to work on the grape harvest to earn some money. But when they get there, everything is not going as they planned, and they end up having to work on an industrial chicken farm. There is this general sense of dread and menace. Whilst working on this chicken farm, they are also having to live on a campsite where the conditions are just getting worse by the day. This is actually an experience the author genuinely went through in real life, but this is just a more embellished, fictionalized version of it. As the graduates become more and more exhausted by these tiring long shifts. They become more and more paranoid about the behaviour of their colleagues and co-workers, and an unexplained death that no one seems to be giving them answers to. The further into the story we get, and the more treacherous the daily lives of these graduates becomes, the sense of reality really begins to blur, and you start to question what is actually real. On the back of this book, it is compared to Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin, and I 100% agree. I think if you enjoy her books, and obviously specifically Fever Dream, I think you will really enjoy this.